All right, guys. So we have Chuck Bennington back on the podcast. Chuck, I think you, besides our own staff, are probably have the most appearances on our podcast. I think this is our third one.
Bum, 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 bum.
So
That's awesome.
I'll have to send you something as an honor to have you here. But yeah, the first time I had taken your gymnastics course, which is what we're going to talk about today as well, and then we hopped on to talk about gymnastics. Then we got on again talking about coaching like you mean it. So a lot of coaching topics. But those were also more than a few years ago, so I thought we could go back. We are hosting, if people are listening to this in relative real time, we are hosting a gymnastics course at our box Kanna Fitness in Ambler, Pennsylvania, December 11th and 12th. So if you are listening to this prior to that, you should sign up. Chuck will be gracing us with his presence as instructor. So I thought what we could do is kind of give people a sense of what all of that entails, why they might want to think about doing it. And even if they're not local to us, once it does appear or pop up near them, why they might want to dive into this world of gymnastics.
Absolutely. So go for it. What were you going to say?
I was going to ask you to give an overview of what the weekend might look like, just even from a broad view and kind of timeline, what to expect.
So the expectation of the weekend, I think, is a bit of a blurry line in the expectations that a lot of people have from other seminar experiences. So I think there's a lot of education pieces in our industry that people go through as coaches. And it ends up being a lot more instructing and learning kind of sequences of instruction as ways to manage groups of humans, and not quite as much coaching, really looking at identifying and changing behaviors. And you can even think about like somebody's squat mechanics or a behavior. So I think that from a coaching perspective, we do a very good job of contextualizing a lot of what really happens in coaching interactions and what makes coaching interactions more or less favorable. The benefit in that is that there's tons of carryover to, if you can make a coach athlete relationship work a little bit better with gymnastics, well, it probably stands to reason it's going to work better with literally everything else. And if you can build a skill of communicating with another human to help them achieve their needs and wants, well, then, man, you're probably like a better friend and a better spouse and a better employer or employee. So we really do look at actual coaching development and helping facilitate the growth of the coach as an individual, regardless of where they apply it. And then we just help them apply it to gymnastics, because the potential simplicity of gymnastics lends itself to really kind of crystallizing concepts, because you can watch only the body and how like somebody's relationship with their brain and their body works independent of any other objects or any other focal points. So that's probably a little bit more than the initial answer would have been, but happy to have gotten a chance to expand on that. And then from an athlete perspective, do you ever wish that you could go back in time and talk to yourself on day one of fitness adventure life? Be like, hey, there's a thing called a snatch. Just use an empty bar for a few years. I know that's going to seem like crazy talk, but trust me, past me, you won't regret it. And this is future me talking to you. And so I think for a lot of athletes, it's a chance to relearn things the way they wish they would have learned them the first time. And I think that inherently, most athletes in our community, if they're honest with themselves, they know that their gymnastics are super lacking. Often they don't have to contend with that until a test piece like the Open or an online qualifier.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're usually fairly disappointed with where it seems like their overall fitness has landed them. But in reality, it's often being exposed to the weakness of their gymnastics, because statistically significant, most people don't follow the general hierarchy of athletic development that Glassman had outlined for CrossFit. And it substantiates itself pretty well that if you can't move your body, moving your body plus something else is probably not going to work a whole lot better.
Right. A lot of people get into the weightlifting. They love the weightlifting, but that's near the top of that pyramid, sport being the apex of it. Um, whereas gymnastics is obviously further down. Um, I think a lot of people might look at the gymnastics course and think either they need to be a very good gymnast or good mover of their body already and have muscle ups and have handstand walks. And then I think the other thing people probably assume is that they should be a coach in order to take this course, or
Yeah.
that it's designed just for coaches. So maybe can you talk about those two ideas or myths of like, number one, you need to already be, a good gymnast, however they would define it, and then number two, that it's only for coaches.
Yeah, so I think that relative to that first conversation that we actually just kind of piggyback off of, if we look at it through the lens of future you talking to past you to direct you to a better present, regardless of the ability level that you're at, like you might as well fix what's broken as soon as possible. And I think that, like, pushing it further out, like, well, I know that X, Y, or Z is lacking for whatever variety of reasons, whether I understand them or not, but I'll do something about it next year or on Monday or after I'll get a muscle up and then I'll worry about making it better. Or,
Mm-hmm,
I can
mm-hmm,
only do 3 kipping pull-ups, so it doesn't make sense for me to go and like actually work on the thing until I can do more. Why would you want to be better at being worse? And so, regardless of where somebody's at in their journey, if they suspect that their gymnastics could be better, we might as well figure out how to make it good as easily as possible, as intelligently as possible, as soon as possible. And that kind of bridges the gap for the people that sit in there. There's a ton of people that come through the course and little, howdy doody, beginning of a seminar, everybody's getting to know everybody. Hey, I'm Jimmy from, Wichita Falls or whatever. Most people then on the athlete side of things, the very next line will be like, I'm just an athlete. Be like, cool. So you're here just as an athlete. Do you feel like you are better at tasks that you understand more? And I think most people would understand, like, yeah, I've gotten a whole lot better in my career as I've advanced because I understand the principles of like the things that my job or my, whatever entails. We almost universally find just how humans get their human on, the brain talking to their body. The more we understand something inherently, the better our actions, reactions, and like the effort that we consolidate towards that end goal end up paying off for us. So
mm-hmm.
building a base of really understanding the thing that you're doing for yourself and how it works, even if it's just for yourself, not for other people, and kind of that coaching lens. Like if you can really understand it, could you teach it to an 8-year-old? Cool. If you, even as somebody that can't do pull-ups, can figure out like how you would explain how a pull-up worked to an 8-year-old and build for them a sequence of logical progressions to get them from not having a pull-up to having a pull-up, do you feel like you'd be able to manage yourself over a lifetime with your fitness? And if you're just an athlete and you do agree that you would like to do fitness things for the rest of your life, is it fairly logical that there's going to be pieces of your life from now until the end of it where you're going to be doing exercise things without a coach? I would reason to say that that's a pretty good bet. So at some point, inevitably, as long as you're looking to do the thing that you're doing now better for the rest of your life, you're going to have to coach yourself.
And you have that phrase, RX is understanding.
Yeah,
Like we've talked about
I
that before,
like
but
that.
yeah, the RX, people hear RX, they think about the weights and the pull-ups and blah blah blah. But we talked about this before, but if RX actually means understanding, then you that implies a certain assimilation of that knowledge and applying it to whatever it is that you're doing, right? Without
Yeah,
just going through the motions to go through the motions. Or for some of our people who may be gifted enough to be able to do the, you know, more shallow RX definition, right?
yeah,
Just muscling through things without actually understanding what it is they're doing.
yeah. And through the seminar, we really look at it as, very deliberately building conscious competence.
Hmm.
There's a ton of people in our community that can do some gymnastic-y things, but a lot of it's unconscious competence that didn't sequence as it
Hmm.
should have through
Hmm.
conscious competence to get there. And so, quickly raise your hand if you got your first muscle up and you have no idea what you did prior in the 10,000 failed attempts, right? Like, yeah, it's all of us because we were a little bit ahead of where the knowledge and the coaching ability in the community have fortunately ended up. And my guess is
Hmm.
you got into this, well over 10 years ago. And I think we talk about this probably on like maybe that's the first podcast. Like,
Yeah, I think we both around 2008.
yeah, like
Yeah.
there was no references and nobody was looking at how do we get just general normal humans to be able to do things like muscle ups and walk on their hands beyond like, hey, this would be a good challenge to aspire to rise to. But being able to step away and look at how do humans build habits? How do humans build behaviors? How do humans build repeatable actions that they can progressively improve upon? Um, and man, like it's so much cooler to approach these things now, and I think that's a lot of like what drives me in my coaching. Well, I know it is. It's having conversations with the younger version of myself,
Hmm.
but very much so being like, no, you don't get it. If you get it, it gets better and it gets easier. And I think a lot of people can have a momentary kind of tripping over the truth and realizing like, oh shit, that is the case in the context of fitness, like with their snatch. You were trying to learn how to snatch. Somebody was telling you like chest up, shoulders back, knees back, armpits, whatever, like a million cues, and your brain
Hmm.
is just completely overwhelmed. And the cues didn't even make sense because your level of reference was already exceeded. You're like, I can barely get in this setup position, so you don't need to like tell me how to continue moving up this ladder.
Hmm.
But lo and behold, years later, after a lot of very deliberate practice, because inherently everybody in our community does move into building their weightlifting movements, not everybody, but the vast majority, through like conscious competence. They're like, oh, I'm working on
Hmm.
tall snatches or high hang snatches so I can figure out my third pull so I can be faster and more consistent under the bar. Like they're looking at the very obvious logical breakdowns in the movement. They are building conscious competence. They're drilling it, rehearsing and repeating it until it then becomes unconscious competence. Even if they don't know that that's what they're doing, even if they're not
Hmm.
thinking about it that way, like you do the Bergner warm up 2 or 3 times a week for 5 or 6 years, weird. It starts to work, right? But when was the last time somebody went through that process with any singular piece of their gymnastics, regardless of the level that they're at? So regardless if we're talking about like the athlete, if the correlation's the Bergner warm up, that's like just only ever snatching PVC, but they're going through the sequencing, the positions, the shapes, all of that, or the person that's snatching double body weight, and they have built that progressive sequence on an empty bar a million times. Um, there's nothing that correlates to that in people's gymnastics. Nobody goes through just like on the smallest, lowest level, like restoring the range, stabilizing the range, building the skill, and then like drilling a repetitive pattern that is moving correctly because we did the right things to get there as just a general piece of a warm up. I would reasonably feel like it's a safe assumption if you went through like a Bergner warm up version of a pull up or a muscle up every day, that you had some element that was similar in your training for several years, you'd get way better at pull ups and muscle ups, even if you actually didn't do anything else beyond build that more conscious competence and better neurological sequencing through just the deliberate act of practice. Um,
Yeah. After I took your cert, I went back and revised our what we call base camp
yeah.
process, which is our onboarding process, and worked in things like scap push-ups, scap pull-ups, hollows, arches, all of these basic shapes, and um, partly because of that, but then also we use level method programming, and Nathan Holiday is very big on the foundations of both lifting and also gymnastics. So there's a lot of scap push-ups, a lot of scap pull-ups, a lot of hollow shapes, arch shapes, um, a lot of these universal shapes and basics of gymnastics, and we work those in very often, if not every day, close to it. And it's interesting. People are not getting their first pull up just by the sheer, pull and then frog kick and
Yeah.
all that crap. Um, but people, so it's a longer timeline that people get something like that. We just had a gal get her first pull up, and she's probably been with us, I don't know, a year and a half.
Yeah.
Um, but she did it well, right? She had the right shapes. It was a strict pull up. There's no frog kicking. There's no like reaching with the chin just to get technical chin over bar, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, yeah, super cool stuff.
Yeah. It's, and it also will, so the dividends pay out the further you go on the timeline. It's kind of like, it's a
Hmm.
compound effect of doing the right thing a large number of times until eventually the right thing becomes automatic, kind of what we're talking about
Yeah.
as unconscious competence. And then
Yep.
we have a far better framework to build upon for anything else that comes. And that that's a worthwhile conversation for athletes to have with themselves or for coaches to have with athletes in that moment that they make the decision that I'm going to fix how I move with my body.
Hmm.
Coming to a very real understanding like, hey, the progress up front, it's probably going to be a little bit slower and a little bit more incremental than you would like. But here's the thing. Have you ever found a cheap, fast, and easy way to do anything your entire adult life that's ever worked out well? Literally this many times. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about like learning how to snatch or building a deck at your house.
Hmm.
Like the cut corners will always bite you in your ass. And if we're looking at your body, there's probably not a whole lot that's a lot more valuable than that. And if we've already established previous conversation that the timeline for you exercising and doing fitness things was the rest of your life, it's inevitable at some point. Like if you cut the corner now, you will have to deal with it again in the future. And it's going to be harder because your bad habits, you're just that much better at
Hmm.
them. And you have that many more mobility restrictions. And holy shit, Susan, if you're 28 years old and you can't reach in the back seat when you're driving because your shoulder's fucked up, when those numbers are inverted and you're 82, if you haven't done something differently, it's only going to be worse. So, like, yeah, it might take a little bit longer to get to the baseline that we should have had from the beginning. But if you got to do it no matter what, we might as well do it now. And I think buying into that longer timeline also helps with lowering the bar, lowering the expectation. A
Hmm.
ton of people, like, obviously, through what I do in the community, there's a ton of people that are like, hey, can you help me come up with, like, my own progression for XYZ? Like, insert literally any gymnastic movement you could even think of, or a weightlifting movement, because I actually love coaching weightlifting. Spent a lot of time doing that. But I'll generally give them something a little bit more skill prescriptive that is progression based rather than scale based. And I'll say, hey, just do this 3 times a week for 3 weeks and then get back to me and I'll help you come up with the next step. And I think I've only ever had maybe like 4 or 5 people even like see that through. And I'm like,
Yep.
that seems like lunacy to me, like on the outside looking in. But I do remember when I thought that there was a fast, cheap, easy way to do anything because I hadn't matured
Yeah.
that much in my own views of things, my own like realizations about just the nature of things and how it be sometimes, my good sir.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, like if you're not willing to work on scat pull-ups and scat push-ups 3 times a week for 3 weeks, like we literally don't need to talk about anything more advanced than that because that thing has to go well. For anything more complex, anything higher load, anything more fatiguing beyond it. You realize that, right? Like if you can't overhead squat an empty bar well, any amount of weight above that is exceeding the capacity of what you can do well. And so I think that that ties back into like a little bit of just like the catchphrase of like the RX is understanding, and a lot of it is like understanding kind of these truths that we know to be self-evident. And I think we're always fucking guilty as humans because we're short-sighted, egotistical little monsters and adults because like we're fucking stressed out and we got like big things, and we make these assumptions like I could climb on a playground when I was a kid, like I could do pull-ups all day, like I should just be able to do the thing, and it was fast and it was easy and it came together then. It's like, well, yeah,
Hmm.
but you've got like six childlike bodies attached to your big ass adult body, like you're a big heavy human, and you
Hmm.
forgot how to do this many years ago, like your brain forgot how that whole thing works. So like you're learning a new skill starting in a worse place. You wouldn't feel so bummed about like the rate that you're not developing your pull up at if you thought about it as your 3-year-old son in a
Hmm.
weight vest that was like probably 50 to 60% body weight. You'd be like,
Right.
oh, well, yeah, I'd be surprised if he could hang on the bar. You're like, right.
Yeah. And part of it is also people's, I mean, obviously people's impatience, but also this idea that, these progressions might not look like the thing that you end up wanting to do. Right. So they see someone doing a muscle up and it's like, I want to do that. And it's like, all right, cool. Scat push ups,
Yeah.
scat pull ups. Well, that doesn't look anything like what that guy's doing. Right. But this is step one.
Well, I think like, and that is the advantageous nature of using progressions rather than scales, because a progression
Correct.
has far more similarity to the end goal movement than it does difference. We're not like substituting something, we're not swapping it out, like it's not something vastly different. So if
Hmm.
you walk somebody through the logical sequence of progressions and you're like, hey, scap goes from elevation to depression. Then the
Hmm.
lats start closing the shoulder angle. Then the biceps start closing the elbow and deflection. And they can start understanding how, like, oh, these little things where we go scap pull ups into lat activations, into quarter pulls and half pulls, into some isometric pauses. They're like, now I can visually see what you're telling me about this little ladder of success that we're climbing up.
Sure.
And so I
But
think
isn't that on the
that,
coach? That's on the coach, right? Like I feel like
well,
a lot of this, there's a responsibility
man,
on the coach.
I am so endlessly torn on this. And I feel like as long as I've been in it, I would have a really good crystallized answer, but I spend a lot of time thinking about these things. Maybe that's dangerous. Do you feel, and like just you as Chris, like not you as, just very personally, like your own journey in fitness, do you feel like you made better, faster, more effective, more deliberate process because you were invested in it and because you wanted for the success?
Yeah, I think that's a prerequisite as a foundation. But I will also say that having a coach to have you shortcut, not in a cheap, fast way, but shortcut in a these are the right progressions for you, um, is very real. And I can say
Oh
that
yeah,
because
for
when
sure.
yeah, like when I started CrossFit, I was teaching myself this by going to the college gym, downloading .mov files from main site because that's
The
the
old
only way you could
QuickTime
see
and like,
anything,
or
QuickTime videos, and
the
moving
yellow
that sliders.
subtitles.
Yeah, the yellow and white subtitles that Tony Budding was putting together, and they had that whole page with just all of the movements, that huge library, and you just
Yeah,
go through every single one. I went through like a month just spending going through that whole website
yeah,
before even trying a workout. Did that for a year and a half, trying to figure out my own stuff on how to do all of this. Joined an affiliate a year and a half in, knew enough, relatively to keep up, but the amount that I learned in that first 3 months of being at an affiliate with a coach far surpassed that year and a half trying this on my own.
concur. What had you engaged in and demonstrated prior to being in the affiliate? Like you were seeking coaching.
For sure.
And I guess that's probably more of what I intended to speak to rather than probably how I verbalized it, is just like the
Mm,
intention and desire to get better, but really
okay. Sure.
the intention to be guided, the intention to be coached, the intention of having a better path laid out that you can take ownership of to like work
Yes.
cohesively with to make the progress. Because I think you'd also agree, and especially like owning a gym, there's a ton of people that like in 3 years, they don't make as much progress as somebody right next to them in the same class that started at the
Hmm.
same time can make in 3 months when they
Yeah, I get
take
what you're saying.
the ownership of their role in that.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
And
Someone
yeah, so I think
who's
like
willing to take it slow and take the progressions to knowing that the payoff is going to be further down the line, but it's going to be a better payoff. Just like, investing, that curve doesn't start hockey sticking until much later on.
yeah, and like what they can control in that is the will that they put forth. And so I
Hmm.
guess that, the will is determined by the individual or the athlete, but the coach accelerates the skill. Because you can't just want for
Yep.
yourself to be better, but the coach
Correct.
can shortcut skill development and helping you not have to learn hard lessons on your own. But the
Correct.
more will that the individual has, the better the coaching process works, and the better that even sans coach, just effort counts twice. I guess is
Yeah.
the interesting little quip on that. Um,
Yeah. I consider myself lucky because our members uh, are very invested in uh, the learning aspect, right? One of our core values is learning. So, whether that's because we do put it out there in our social media or because it's just the area that we're in or whatever the case may be, our members are very open, receptive, looking,
yeah,
actively seeking this. I do put it on the coach though, because they're the professional in my mind. They are the teacher, they are the instructor, they are the guide. If we want to go story brand, um, who to me has the greater responsibility to
I
not
agree.
just, I've had people say, yeah, I was at this gym and they said to just pull harder, right? Or
You're
they
like,
just said to
well, that's
just pull
not
up,
it.
right? And to me, that's not professional. It's not
It's lazy.
correct. It's lazy, right?
It's lazy and
Um,
it's selfish and it's short-sighted and like I don't know. There's a million downsides and detriments to it. Least of all is like that both parties are missing out on a great experience because people like winning
yeah.
is very cool to be a part of. Um, yeah, man, that's it is it is never it is never lost on me that I can't ever seem to wrap my head around why there are people that are involved in this industry in any context or capacity that like don't absolutely love it and want to do it really well for the sake of doing it really well. Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with people's health and fitness. So like their bodies, their physical states, that's a priceless piece. You are occupying time, no insignificant amount of time as like a service provider because sure as shit nobody else sees a doctor or a lawyer like 5 or 6 times a week unless your life is fucked up. So like there's an incredible amount of time occupied in working on their health and fitness, and so all of those are priceless things, and so like holy shit man, like be happy and lucky that you get to be a part of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I forgot what we were talking about prior to that.
Yeah, I don't know either.
It's tangenty.
Let's talk. So let's talk about bigger timeline. So when did you start coaching seminars?
2011.
Okay, so
And
in 10 years, what have you seen change?
oh, this takes
Uh,
us actually full circle back to right where we were in the conversation that it's incumbent on the coach to help kind of redirect people as a guide and agreeing to that point. A big piece of what a coach needs to do, and in their coaching development, and this probably goes into where you're talking about like 10 years later, like a lot of what I've changed in my own coaching, what I would do differently, or just like lessons learned in over a decade being on kind of like the pointier end of the spear, so to speak, of like coaching coaches with
mhm.
the vast majority of my time and energy. It's incumbent on the coach to redirect people as a guide because a good coach should recognize all of the errors and failure of human nature and human behavior. Does that make sense?
Talk about that more.
So, fixing somebody's squat doesn't need to happen if that person has maintained a good, functional, healthy squat their entire life. So as you work to fix the squat, it's probably fairly beneficial to figure out like, why can't you squat well? And why hasn't that been important enough to you to do something about it until we made it to this juncture in your life? And so looking at, the behavior side of things and going back to like the earlier conversation of getting people to refocus on progressions is the realization that like we are hardwired to look to cut the corner,
Hmm.
especially when the metric is on a public leaderboard, especially when you are in a group dynamic. Like it's part of what makes the whole thing work. Objective measures of progress, working in a group environment, having a social like experience tied into exertion. Um, and the dose is the poison. And we've all seen that go horribly wrong for coaches, owners, like gyms, athletes. It's a slippery slope. And so a lot of it is for the coach to recognize, not just with the athlete as an individual in their own timeline, but, for the gym as a community and for the class as a group working on a shared task at the same time. Like really looking at like, why are these behaviors getting off track? You know the sequence of progressions. You've seen it work 100 times in the gym. Like, Susan, you've been here for 2 years. Like, you've seen this sequence, 4 pull-ups. It works. You've got irrefutable proof. It's all around you. I know it works. You know it works from what you're seeing. Why do you think that banded pull-ups are the answer for you? Like, we need to explore why you think that you are the outlier that the progression
Hmm.
doesn't apply to, because man, like, either I'm missing something and I don't think I am, or you're missing something. And that's probably where we need to dig a little deeper. Um, that's a lot and that's a longer conversation, but I think that's more of the nature of where I've seen things change for the better with a lot of the coaches that I've been kind of in the seminar game with long term.
Hmm.
And probably a lot of people like yourself that have made the transition from, coaching their friends to coaching clients to coaching their coaches. And as you move and evolve higher up that hierarchy of developing humans, the nature of the game changes quite a bit. And yeah, or just even that you have the ability to like reference like story brand, that in the lexicon of micro gym owners in our community, people are looking at building and developing storytelling as a skill. That's a very different fucking group of humans than you and me in 2008 trying to
Hmm.
pirate free Wi-Fi from the library to download like videos onto our laptop to then go home and watch. Wow. But it's
Yeah.
really easy to lose sight of where we're at in our journeys and thinking back that like, oh, a lot of the clients in our gyms, like they're us in 2008. And that's why regardless of like
Hmm.
what we say in here, they go home, they see some stupid fucking knucklehead drill on like YouTube or Instagram and they're like, "Coach, I figured it out, man. I found some Instagram gold. Give me 3 foam rollers, 2 bands, and like, I don't know, chalk me up, bro. I'm going in. I got a muscle up by the end of the day." And you're like, it's not gonna work because I've seen it all. But they haven't. And like humans are wired to look for like novelty. Because like sometimes novelty has disproportionately high risk and reward relationships.
Hmm.
Sometimes you figure out that like, oh man, strawberries and raspberries are fucking delicious, and there's acres of them, guys. Like we can eat good here for a long time, and sometimes it kills you. But we look for those things, and until we test those things for ourselves, or unless somebody in a guide position can connect with us deeply enough for us to believe what they're saying, more often than not, most athletes and most coaches they have to trip over their own truths. They have to like learn the thing to be true for themselves before the thing that somebody else said 1,000 times finally
Hmm.
clicks.
Yeah, and both you and I are now and will continue to experience that with our kids. So,
Oh, dude, it's so crazy. It's so crazy. It's the best.
so I think we got like 10 minutes left. Last time we talked was pre-pandemic, pre Eric Rosa. pre, you know, we're seeing a lot of affiliates either de-affiliate, shut down completely, sell to, coaches. So a lot of new owners in the game. Um, where do you feel like the industry is heading? And that might even include, things like Peloton and tech and,
Man,
online services.
we need about 9 more hours to talk
I
through this
I know I just
layered
opened a
onion.
rabbit hole. Yeah, I
Um,
recognize that.
it'll be interesting to see the intersection of monetized data and fitness coexisting. Um, that's all I'll probably go into with that without making that like a crazy long rabbit hole, because that could get like very, very off track. But I am genuinely fascinated in that, and I think that potentially how the powers that be gamify the system, there could be some big wins for like humanity and society as a whole. Um, to give a short little like piece on that as an example, so that people aren't just like, what the fuck are you even talking about? If we could apply taking something like somebody's workout scores from SugarWOD or Beyond the Whiteboard to customize like health and life insurance coverage for them based on being able to model far better actuarial risk of what that would mean for the person like taking on the financial risk of insuring their health or their life,
Hmm.
we could do really favorable things for everybody involved, rather than try to take this ever widening chunk out of the middle of a shitty bell curve distribution of people's health and their death. So, as like one example of where I personally feel like monetized data applied to health and fitness could change entire industries for the better. One example, I got like a bunch in my head, but that'd be a fun conversation to have like some beers over.
Mm,
I think that there is a necessity for some of the structures that exist in CrossFit to move into, trying to like choose wording carefully, just more deliberate organizational structures, because, and you probably even know this from your own gym, like you can grow and not all growth is good relative to where you're at operationally. And because
for
CrossFit
sure.
had some secret sauce, like, dude, in what other universe did you get a bunch of people all over the planet to potentially develop like orthorexic exercise behaviors as people who had never fallen into any type of like fitness, lifestyle, gym membership, athletic endeavor? The fact that like at scale, we've got people that like, now people are coming in, they're like, yo, you guys need to remember that last line of world class fitness in 100 words. And like, you need to regularly go and play new sports, because like we've got
Yep.
millions of people exercising 2 or 3 hours a day and getting like incredibly fit, not just like 2 or 3 hours a day in like orthorexic dysfunction on a treadmill trying to starve themselves to nothing, but like world class athletes being built in like industrial parks right down the road all day, every day. And that's pretty nuts. And so, whatever, like it works so well that in effect, like that piece of methodology and its efficacy helps scale the business and the brand faster than anybody ever could have predicted. Dude, and like,
Hmm.
back to our earlier conversation, when you were watching videos in 2008, would you have really imagined that less than 10 years later, you would have title sponsors involved and be like the Reebok CrossFit Games live on YouTube and Facebook, and like
Right.
the
Not at all.
enormity
Yeah.
of it in such a short timeline? And so I think there's a large positive in them having an opportunity to really revisit some organizational structures. And a lot of that I'm not privy to. So a lot of it is assumption on my behalf, but knowing for sure from like firsthand experience, and then a ton of second and third hand experience from like other friends, other business owners, and just like things that I've read in a million books. Scale is a bitch for organizations sometimes, and especially if the scale isn't really deliberately planned for. And so I think
Hmm.
that does create some wins for them to maybe fix. And I don't know, like I said, it's assumptions. Maybe fix some things operationally on the back end and be like, hey, like roles and responsibilities not clear between these two departments. Like, hey, you talk to him and he talks to her, but really like they could just talk. And so I think it's probably a really
Hmm.
good opportunity to future proof the business and the brand relative to, yes, I'm comfortable saying like future proof. I think a lot of people are like, it's dead. And I'm like, nah, because it works too well. Like it can't
Right.
not exist. I've mentioned this on like other things, and it's like a talking point. But like, dude, there's a whole 30 bowl at Chipotle. Like, Frazier was running like paid promo for burrito bowls at Chipotle. Like, Nike's here. Like, it's the genie's not
Yeah.
going back in the bottle. The bottle might change, but like it can't go away. It just can't. Like, it's too big.
Hmm.
It's too big in the face of the planet relative to diet, exercise, nutrition, and performance is forever changed. We have broken a ton of what existed in like traditional strength conditioning models and like peer reviewed literature, and they're like, yeah, no, none of that's ever going to work out, and be like, it just did. Oh, and they did it too, and
Yeah.
we don't
In real
know
life.
why it works and how it works, but like that's pretty good that it does, so let's keep exploring.
Yep.
Relative to keep exploring, relative to the nature of the methodology and the affiliate model, that is the one piece that I take a little reservation with in what CrossFit is really doing from a very well-intentioned place to standardize large pieces of the affiliate community and the operations. And like I love where they're at with like tools, not rules. Like, we're going to give you guys a ton of tools. We're going to give you like good examples of how they work, but we're not going to actually define what happens in your affiliate. Like, and that's cool. But the more tools that are more similar that go to more affiliates who find the ways to implement them in the more and more similar manners, the more you start to shift away from a lot of what made the affiliate model work. In my own experience, in mind, that the uniqueness of the affiliate is what lended itself to the little microcosms that could fit within like fairly consistent tribal and behavioral dynamics. That like, dude, the people that want to be at a gym like Kanna and really get their balls coached off every day and get an enormous amount of touch points and interactions, like, they can go there and they can do that. And the dudes over here that just like, they don't even own shirts anymore, and like, every day is a 3 a day, and like whatever, like they can go congregate over there, and that's cool.
Hmm.
Humans will always behave differently relative to the individual, but they will always behave similarly in group dynamics and social settings. We're just that wiring predates so much more of what we'll ever be able to like fuck with and manipulate. Like, people just get their people on.
Hmm.
And so the more that you start homogenizing what some of those environments are, the more I'm concerned about there always being a place for the coaches, the owners, and the athletes to all independently like pursue the philosophies that would be innate to them. Now that's different because like CrossFit's very aware of that as a potential problem. They're looking at like, hey, probably we're looking at potentially dividing the community, at least as a thinking exercise, into thirds. Third of the community is like follow and cap and like the affiliate playbook and like doing really similar stuff. Third of the community is just really like following other outside solutions. Like they're getting some help from Two Brain. They're working with Affiliate. They're getting their programming from Pat Barber, or like, whatever, other third parties. And then they assume that like a third of the community is going to be like just as punk rock libertarian as like most CrossFit affiliate owners are. And they'll be like, anyway, we're over here doing our thing. And that's cool because like they're already looking at it through the lens of having a place for every potential scenario where they can all coexist and thrive. The reservation that I have is, if you think back to like a lot of where software became very interesting was when open source models became more freely publicly distributed, and like we got to see more iterations at scale, advanced product development on way shorter timelines with way better returns.
Hmm.
That's what we have found with CrossFit, is as soon as we had like, 17,000 gyms running these programming experiments, like, man, people got way fitter, way faster, as the community had the opportunity to look at like just the fitness and programming side in an open source nature. We've also figured out some incredible things as a community of businesses that exist in a microcosm in an open source, very free market way, that like, you guys can all get your gym on however you want. And we're going to figure out some pretty interesting little commonalities of strategies that like the people that are better at this have going on. I would venture to guess that like you probably start with a consult. I would venture to guess that you probably bring people in for a diagnostic. I would venture to guess you probably run through some type of movement screen. I would venture to guess you probably do some serious goal setting. I would venture to guess that you probably bring people onboarding initially through a higher volume of PT sessions. I would venture to guess that the majority of the members that you focus the majority of your time and energy on have somewhat of a hybrid membership where they have class access, some amount of PT, and some personalized programming. Those are all assumptions without us having talked in like 3 years. Did I get at least 4 or 5 of those right?
Pretty much all of them. Yeah.
Right. Because we're not giving people tools or rules, we're letting people figure out in an organic way where an open source methodology of business ownership and management resonates with their core values and beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that won't be compromised at all. And I'm not like, I am for sure no doom and gloom speaker, and I'm not a negative dude at all. But like, those are my two thoughts is like, potentially the more people they're doing more stuff the same, the more we start losing out on opportunities to benefit all of the affiliates that want to grow, or all the people in the micro gym space that are looking at like, hey, if I look at 10,000 gyms doing
Mm-hmm.
10,000 different versions of this, what are the couple of small commonalities that I should pay more attention to? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then, on the programming side, it is advancing human performance on a global scale. So I'd be sad to see the rate of progress with that slow down at all. But anyway, that kind of takes us to time. And if
Yeah.
that sounds like anything interesting to follow up on, I will be there in a couple of weeks and we can hang out and talk about all of it and maybe have a beer or two. But I love this stuff. Chris, dude, thank you a ton, man. Always a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yeah, guys, December 11th and 12th, sign up. So where can people sign up and where can they find you?
Thegymnasticscourse.com, and there's navigation links to get to a registration page. I will be posting it in my stories regularly. There's a link to the TGC Instagram in my bio that'll take you to a registration page. If you can't find it, you can find me at Chuck Bennington on Instagram. DM me if you can't get to it. I'll set you up.